inshallah we'll start in just a second. I just let the brother finish his maghrib. No. Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Okay, let's make sure. I was pretty sure I wasn't the only one here, but sometimes you gotta. So we're continuing with our kind of tafsir that we've been doing here, and actually looking at the Qur'an and just going over some of the scholarship from a number of different of the mufassirin. Today, over this section that will continue from Surah Al-Baqarah, we'll predominantly look at these two scholars who I thought it'd be interesting because As-Sa'di is kind of a more contemporary scholar, and Imam al-Baghawi is considered more classical. So we'll kind of look and see some of what they had to say. So we had gone through Al-Fatiha, and then we began with the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah. We're still very much in the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, and we're getting close to the ayat that discuss nifaq, right? We're getting close to the end of the verses that discuss hypocrisy. So picking up, this is the passage where Allah Ta'ala says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَإِذَا لَقَوْا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قَالُوا آمَنَّا. Right, and when they, meaning the hypocrites, when they meet up with those who believe, they say, we believe as well. وَإِذَا خَلَوْا إِلَى شَيَاطِينِهِمْ قَالُوا إِنَّ مَعَهُمْ. But when they go back to their shayateen, right, to their devils, meaning to the other people kind of just like them, they say, well, no, we are with you, إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُسْتَهْزِئُونَ. That we're only just, leading these people on. We're only just mocking them. We're just making fun of them when we say we believe. And then Allah says about them trying to mock people, Allah yastahzi'u bihim wa yamutuhum fi tughyanihim ya'mahun. Right? And then Allah is the one that is actually mocking them, and He leaves them to be in a prolonged period. It kind of abandons them in their tughya, right? In their transgression. Ya'mahun, just kind of like blindly wandering around. In some ways, not even recognizing that's and we'll get into that in a second. But essentially, the wool is really being pulled over their eyes to the point that they may not even recognize that they're being hypocritical. أُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ اشْتَرَوُا الضَّلَالَ بِالْهُدَىٰ. They're the ones that have, instead, they have bartered or traded misguidance for guidance. فَمَا رَبِحَتْ تِجَارَتُهُمْ وَمَا كَانُوا مُهْتَدِينَ. Right? and that this transaction brought them no gain, and that they are not from amongst those who are considered to be guided. So in this part here, if we look, particularly again dealing with the topic of hypocrisy, Muslims talk a lot about kufr. We love to talk about kufr. We like this is what I call like the Muslim KKK, the kufr, the kafir, and the kufar. Right? This is like the Muslim KKK, and we love to talk about the kafir, the kafir, the kafir. Right? But in many ways, kufr is pretty apparent. Right? If I go every time I walk in Bonds, matter of fact, it's weird when you walk in, there's immediately the alcohol is right there. Right? And I have a choice. I can either go buy it or not buy it, right? I can participate or not. And I see it very plainly what it is, right? The same thing when if I walk in the meat aisle, okay, which is funny because Vaughn's carries halal meat and they carry pork. But it's very obvious. There's the pork, right? It's very obvious to leave alone, right? So not to belittle the importance of kufr, but in many ways, kufr is pretty straightforward often, right? And I'm not getting into, some finer points of fiqh and whatnot, but overall, kufr is apparent. Now, whether or not a person does an act that is considered like disbelief, that's a whole nother conversation. But that Allah has to treat the conversation of nifaq, of hypocrisy, with nearly 2 pages, right, shows that the conversation and what entails hypocrisy is a lot more serious than simply just kufr. And like whenever reading the Qur'an, we should try to put ourselves in the driver's seat. We should try to put ourselves under the spotlight, right? So when you read a passage where Allah Ta'ala talks about Bani Israel and how they disobeyed him or something, right? The lesson is not that Allah hates the Jews, right? The lesson is the Jews were what? They were basically us a long, long time ago, right? And some of the same pitfalls or mistakes that the Jews made are there for us to learn from so that we don't commit the same mistakes, right? So the same thing with this, when we're going over a passage, then we're talking about hypocrisy. It isn't just to get, the Wikipedia of hypocrisy, right? It isn't just to get the facts. It's for my benefit to help bolster my guidance to make sure that I'm not going down that road. So as to the part in the beginning, وَإِذَا لَقَوْا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قَالُوا آمَنَّا, right, into the part of the verse, right, that begins in the 14th ayah here in Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah says, and when they meet those that believe, they say, we also believe. Sa'adi says, هَذَا مِنْ قَوْلِهِمْ بِأَلْسَنَتِهِمْ مَا لَيْسَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ. So this is the interesting thing here about dealing with hypocrisy that Al-Sa'adi is pointing out is that this is dealing with things that are manifest, right? This isn't just somebody just doesn't believe. Like you might have a kafir who's very sincere, right? Wrong, but sincere. I just don't believe. I just don't get it, whatever, right? That isn't a person that's trying to either fool people or deceive people, right? So he's saying it's what been qawlihim, it's from their statements, bi al-sanatihim, right? From their tongues, ma laysa fi qulubihim. This is not, not to say, Allah says fi qulubihim marad, right? In their hearts is disease, but it's that this is something manifest, right? This is something on the outside, right? And he continues by saying, وَذَلِكَ أَنَّهُمْ إِذَا اجْتَمَعُوا بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and that this is due to that when they would gather with the believers, أَظْهَرُ أَنَّهُمْ عَلَى طَرِيقَتِهِمْ وَأَنَّهُ مَعَهُمْ. It would give the impression, right? أَظْهَرُ, right? It would give the impression that they are all on the same path, right? عَلَى طَرِيقَتِهِمْ. So the one thing about hypocrisy is that unlike kufr, is that it's trying to pass itself off as you, as a believer. It's not, in some ways, it's not trying to disagree with you, right? A person who is a disbeliever, non-believer, whatever, kafir, right, may just say, I don't believe you on this or that part. Kind of like the pagan Arabs about, this whole idea of there being like a hereafter. Like, no, we disagree with you on that. And this is just like a regular kafir, right? But here they want to give the impression, أَظْهَرُ أَنَّهُمْ عَلَى طَرِيقَتِهِمْ. They want to give the impression that they're about the same way of life as you, right? وَأَنَّهُمْ مَعَهُمْ, that they're all on the same page. And that adding to this, Al-Badawi says, هَؤُلَاءِ الْمُنَافِقِينَ إِذَا لَقَى الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَالْأَنصَارِ. So this part here in particular I want us to reflect on, and then as a takeaway, maybe come back later. So Al-Baghawi says that, these are the hypocrites, هؤلاء المنافقين, إذا لقى المهاجرين, when they would meet with what the muhajirun, right, the people who emigrated from Mecca to Medina, wal ansar, right? So these are the two esteemed groups that we have in Muslim history, right? The muhajirun, those people that gave up everything and moved from Mecca to Medina, and then the Ansar, right, the helpers that took them in. And what's interesting here is that, or maybe the implication, and we tend to always think we can separate ourselves from kufr, from disbelief, right? But Allah is actually sending the message of Islam in such a way that it's always kind of like mixing and intermingling with those that don't share that belief, either outwardly like a kafir or inwardly like a munafiq, like a hypocrite. And I say that because sometimes we imagine like the perfect Muslim society will be one in which there are no non-Muslims. We often have this, right? And I think a lot of that comes today in particular, where, either the Muslim countries that exist don't really give a feeling of a safe place for Muslims. And actually, I would be curious of Tia to give some reflection, like Malaysia, Indonesia, because a lot of these fall off the map in our imagination, right? When we tend to think of Muslim countries, we don't tend to think of Malaysia and Indonesia, we don't tend to think of countries in Africa. We all tend to be predominantly focused on countries in the Middle East. And in some of those countries, the way that they have constructed them is that there are very little to no non-Muslims, right? So you go to the Gulf, right? I'm not trying to pick on anybody. You go to like Saudi Arabia, you go to Qatar. Emirates is a little bit different. But especially Saudi Arabia, which often in our modern imagination of Muslims is idealized as the perfect Muslim society, right? Where there are virtually almost no non-Muslims. And yet, I don't know if you've ever spent any time in Saudi Arabia, and this isn't a knock against the Saudi people, but it's just the governance, right? Despite the presence of no Muslims or no non-Muslims in Mecca and Medina, look at what the Saudi government is doing to Yemen, right? I mean, this is an atrocity. It's a double atrocity, right? I mean, it's just an atrocity on a humanitarian level, and it's a double atrocity that one group of Muslims would do this to another group, right? So what is revealing here is that, one, there isn't going to be a perfect Muslim society created solely by banishing the existence of non-Muslims, right? This is important for us to understand. This isn't calling for some kind of like kumbaya, we should all get along. No, I mean, obviously, there's things that we may want to bring about, or we may have our own version of what constitutes a good society. And therefore, non-Muslims may also have their version, and that may clash. Although historically, a lot of the golden age of Islam that we like to kind of romanticize involved healthy non-Muslim communities living with Muslims, right? So Muslim Spain, right? A healthy non-Muslim population living there. The Ottoman Empire, right? Definitely lots of non-Muslims living peacefully for the most part. So here we can see that, right? It's because it says what? Laqaw, like when they meet up, and they're in the same spot. They're inhabiting the same space, right? The hypocrite, the kafir, and the mu'min, right? The hypocrite, the non-Muslim, and the Muslim, all are inhabiting the same space. And therefore, that just kind of really shows you that, like, how is Allah arranging these pieces on the chessboard, so to speak? Because He could have just made there's Arabian desert, right? I mean, He could have just made a whole other place in the Arabian desert where there would be essentially no non-Muslims, sent the Prophet there, everybody would migrate into that space, and that could have been the end of the story. But Allah's hikmah in His wisdom is that, no, I'm going to put it right in the midst of shirk, right in the midst of dhulam and, polytheism, oppression, aggression, war. I'm going to put my Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right in the middle of all that, right? And therefore the believers that are going to coalesce around this Prophet, right, they're going to be in the midst of it. So this is just for something positive for our imagination to not get trapped into a kind of one-trick pony, as we like to say in English, right, of establishing a Muslim community can only be done by banishing other than Islam, right? I mean, one of the things that Islam does is that what? It calls people who are not Muslim to Islam. How is that going to happen if the Muslims only live in their secret headquarters, their home base, in the middle of La La Land somewhere, right? So that it gives us, some things to chew on about how we should construct our community. Obviously, just again walling ourselves off would work, but then capitulating, right, and following, right, as the Prophet ﷺ said, I'm concerned about you going down the lizard hole, right? We can't do that either. So we have to find this sweet spot in between trying to be ourselves, but at the same time allowing, as one of my teachers said, if we do this Islam thing right, non-Muslims can even have Islam. They may not have hidayah, right? They may not become Muslim, they may not be believers, they may not believe in what we believe, but they can get the benefit of Islam, right? The benefit of mercy, caring, compassion, justice, equality. They can get all of these things, right, without necessarily even having to become, believers. Not that we don't want that for people, right? But that's something that Allah does, right? So it just gives us something for us to think about how we're going to construct our community. It really challenges this notion of like the magical Muslim community that its perfection is established in the non-existence of non-Muslims, right? So he then goes on to relate a hadith, or more like an athar from Ibn Abbas. He says, قال ابن عباس هو أن يفتح لهم باب من الجنة. So now he's talking about the issue of hypocrisy, right? And he says that for the hypocrite, and he's kind of alluding to, and this is in another, there are other ahadith that corroborate this, that on, essentially like on the Day of Judgment, there will be a door that is opened for the hypocrites, right? And يُفْتَحَ لَهُمْ بَابٌ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ, right? That the hypocrites will literally see the door of paradise. فَإِذَا انْتَحَوْا إِلَيْهِمْ سُدْ. But almost like kind of if they approach it right, it will snap shut on them, right? Which is really terrifying, right? Sud anhum, waraddu ila nar, and they will then be banished back to the fire, right? This isn't just like the non-believer who may just, okay, you're judged, you go into the fire. Like because of when Allah says, Allahu yastahzi'u bihim, right? They say, oh, we're going to pull the wool over you guys' eyes. Allah says, no, I'm really going to fool you guys. And this fooling, this back and forth, right? Allah takes it to a whole other level is, I'm going to let you guys even show up to the day of judgment thinking you're going to go into one of the doors of paradise. You're thinking like, I made it. Maybe you're even thinking like, man, I fooled everybody. I even fooled Allah. And here I am, day of judgment, saw people fall off the sirat into the fire, right? I made it. I even fooled God. And now I'm going to get in and get all the things that all these people, all these knuckleheads, right, as-sufaha, all the silly people that denied themselves in this life, right? I didn't have to deny anything, and now I'm at the door of paradise, right? Sud alayhim, right? It's just going to, boom, snap shut on them, and they will be banished back to the fire. So this really goes to show the seriousness that Allah Ta'ala treats hypocrisy. That it is a degree above even just simple disbelief. And you can see here that this is corroborated actually in a verse from Surah Al-Hadid, right? Which is another area of tafsir, right? There's tafsir of like, okay, looking at ahadith and this and that. And then there's another aspect of tafsir that looks to confirm things with other parts of the Qur'an. So in relation to the athar we just heard from Ibn Abbas, it's also corroborated by this verse in Surah Al-Hadid where Allah says, يَوْمَ يَقُولُ الْمُنَافِقُونَ وَالْمُنَافِقَاتِ, right? On that day, the day of judgment, that the men and women from both men and women from the hypocrites, right? يَوْمَ يَقُولُ الْمُنَافِقُونَ وَالْمُنَافِقَاتِ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, right? They're going to say to the people who believed, انظرونا, right? Wait for us, right? Because they're trying to enter into paradise. Where it says, نَقْتَصِبُ مِنْ نُورِكُمْ, right? Wait for us so that we can maybe, you can lend us or we can borrow some of your light, right? Because, they either don't know where they're going or they didn't really have guidance. They think now at the last minute, they can piggyback off of the people who made it. It's also they think that they can somehow piggyback off of the people that they mocked. I mean, this is the real humiliation of the munafiq. That during life, you chastised, tormented, and mocked simple people of faith. And then on this day, these are the very people you're going to come to and beg, hey, can I just have a little bit of your light, right? قِيلَ ارْجِعُوا, right? And it will be said to them, nah, go back, وَرَاءَكُمْ فَالْتَمِسُوا نُورًا. Go back and find your own light. Except there's one thing we know about the nature of existence. One of Allah's sunnah is what things only go forward. Nobody gets to go back. And this seems to be a theme. Many people will say this, right? When they're judged, just send us back. We promise that we'll be from the muttaqin. We'll promise we'll be pious. It's too late. What was that song? It's too late to apologize, right? Who's that? Oh, okay. I don't know. I just all I know is that somehow, somewhere, I don't know where I was. I heard this song one time, and it literally made me think of this. Right? It's too late to apologize. Right? So it'll be said to them, go back. Right? But there is no going back. You will not be able to go back. It says, فَضُرِبَ بَيْنَهُمْ بِسُورٍ لَهُمْ بَابٍ. Right? And then it will cause that a pathway or a door, like first a wall will be erected between the two of them, and then a door will appear, right? But for the inside, right, بَاطِنُهُ فِيهِ الرَّحْمَةِ, right? For the interior, right, there will be mercy. Meaning the people who did what they were supposed to do, the believers, right? وَظَاهِرُهُ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمُ الْعَذَابِ. But the exterior of it, right, will will be punishment. And this is the flipping the game again on the munafiq. Because in life, the munafiq tries to flip it where on the outside, I'm just like you, right? I'm Anna, right? So on the outside, you're trying to be, this other thing, but right on that day, they'll be cut off, a wall will be put between them, and then now the exterior will be what? Punishment. And the interior will be what? Rahmah, mercy. So this again is why, the subject of hypocrisy, as one of my teachers also said, is really meant to scare, it's just meant to scare you silly of like, you know what, even if a person were to commit an act of kufr, like drink alcohol, to say astaghfirullah, Allah, Ya Rabbi, ighfir inni dhalamtu nafsi, whatever, Allah, forgive me, I wronged myself, and then come back to correct belief, this is far better and easier to deal with than a person that then goes down this path of hypocrisy. Because part of it, and as we'll see here that he talks about, hypocrisy has a way of making hypocrisy seem appealing to you, right? So that's why, so this verse in Surah Al-Hadid confirms, right, the saying that Ibn Abbas is telling us that, it's like on that day a door will literally shut close on them, of which they think they're going to get over, but they don't get over. And then continuing, Allahu yastahzi'u bihim wa yamudduhum fi tughyanihim ya'mahun, right? And then Allah is the one that will, is going to indeed mock them, they will pay, right? And will leave them wandering blindly in their transgressions. As Sa'adi says about this, وَهَذَا جَزَاءٌ لَهُمْ. This is their reward. So, we tend to think of Allah rewarding people for doing good, because the word reward itself tends to be thought of in this positive light, right? Somebody does something good, you give them a reward, right? Allah uses the word jaza, right? Allah uses the word reward, both for good and for evil, right? So Allah Ta'ala says here, وَهَذَا جَزَاءٌ لَهُمْ عَلَىٰ إِسْتِهْزَائِهِمْ, right? That Allah, this is the reward that they will receive, right? For their mockery, for the mockery that they did, right? بِعِبَادِهِ, specifically because this kind of person, the munafiq, right, the hypocrite, mocked his slaves. He says, فَمَنِ اسْتَهْزَأَ Zian, stop, come on, over here, come on. فَمَنِ اسْتَهْزَأَهُمْ بِهِمْ, then for the one that mocks them, he said, أَنَّ زَيِّنَ لَهُمْ مَا كَانُوا fee, right? So for the person that commits this kind of mockery, that Allah will cause the mockery to seem as if they're doing a good thing, right? You see people sometimes that kind of reminded of some of these new atheist guys like Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, right? It's not just that they just say, hey, you know what? I don't believe this stuff, right? Okay, whatever. Lakum dinukum waliyadin, right? It isn't just that, but they go to making a mockery of people for having their beliefs, right? And then they see it actually not just, they don't even see themselves as being making a mockery. I was actually watching a video today where there was a person who is an atheist, but he was disagreeing with like the Sam Harrises and the Richard Dawkins. And he was saying like, hey, it's one thing for you to say like, I just don't get this stuff, I don't believe. It's another thing to just be a jerk, for lack of a better word, right? It's another thing to be mean-spirited, right? And of course, they're all trying to say that, all of the evil in the world, all of the conflict in the world, all has a religious root to it. I'm like, well, when we went and took people's oil and resources, that didn't seem to have a whole lot to do with any religion whatsoever. Just look at how many millions of people died between the Bolshevik Revolution and the Maoist Revolution. I mean, literally, maybe 100 million people or more lost their lives, which was, by the way, officially an atheist regime. But Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins don't really like to talk about that kind of thing. So he's saying here, he said, أَنَّ زَيِّنَ لَهُمْ فِي مَا كَانُوا فِي مِنَ الشِّقَاءِ, right? وَحَالَةِ الْخَبِيثَةِ, that it makes beautiful to them. Zayyina, tazyin. Actually, my daughter's name is Zian, right? It means to be beautiful. It comes from the same root. So the meaning here is that a hypocrite can come to see what they're doing as actually good, right? That their mean-spiritedness, not just that they don't accept, right, but that they take it to the extent of being, mean, mocking, excessive ridicule. They will see it. No. I'm doing good. I'm not being a mean person whatsoever. And he says that it's what right? For the person, it's like this creates kind of a misery. Like a person who has just like a really dirty, distasteful state. Come over here, Zena. I'm talking. Come on. Stop. I'm talking. Come over here. Go back to your tablet. Zena. Thank you. حتى ظن أنه مع المؤمنين. Right. Here's the thing with this kind of hypocrisy, right? He says that you get involved in this to such a point حتى ظنوا أنهم مع المؤمنين, that you actually think that you're just as good or on par with the believer, right? So this is kind of the very dangerous, slippery slope of hypocrisy. And finally, this coincides with the verse that actually is a few ayats before, where Allah says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And what do they say? He says, say to them, don't cause mischief, right? Don't cause fasada. Don't cause, something evil in the earth, right? Which could be akin to this kind of mockery, right? قالوا إنا نحن مصلحون إنما نحن مصلحون, right? They say, what are you talking about? We are the people who are muslihun, we are the people of islah, right? The people of doing good, right? So this is the thing about hypocrisy, is that it also clouds a person's judgment to the point that almost your perspective becomes polarized. That which is good is seen to be bad, and that is bad which seems to be good, right? People praying, fasting, it causes for the hypocrite a deep disturbance in their heart, in the same way for a mu'min would see oppression, some other form of evil. So it's almost as if your perception of reality is polarized to like a 180, right? So this is for some of the reason why Allah Ta'ala goes into a fair amount of detail, not only in Surah Al-Baqarah, but in other ayats as well. In fact, there's a whole chapter about the munafiqun, but goes into detail because, again, kufr is in some ways very apparent. Like later in other ayat, Allah says, وَيَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يُضَرُّهُمْ وَلَا يَنْفَعُهُم. Allah says, and for these people, they're worshiping things that they can neither bring them harm nor benefit, right? So it's kind of like, really, you're worshiping this, it's just an idol, right? It's a piece of wood or stone. It can't even help itself, right? And, that's kind of the more overt and simple form of kufr, right? But this stuff, right, you actually think you're doing the right thing. So the lesson here for us to take away is, really, be cautious about acquiring those qualities, right, of hypocrisy. And we know that some of them, when he speaks, the munafiq lies, or when the hypocrite is given something that's trustworthy, he breaks it and so on. But it's also, look to your demeanor, and I talked about that a little bit today in the khutbah, right? You become overly obsessed with the actions of other people, right? As a matter of fact, after the khutbah, there was one brother who was talking about the Rohingya, right? May Allah have mercy on and help them. And he was so angry, right? The brother was from Lebanon, and he was so angry at what he considered like the Dawlats Arabiya, like these Arab states that have like in the Gulf, right? Oh man, look at all these, Arab countries that have all this money, like Saudi and whatnot. And instead of like going to help the Rohingya, they're actually bombing some other miserable, Muslim country. And he got really worked up, and I understand. I mean, it's a matter of the heart, right? To the point he almost wanted to like make a la'na, like a curse upon them, right? The assumption is that if you gave me, right, and I'll just say for myself, like I come from a very humble background from Detroit, don't come from money, 3 generations away from slavery, right? I come from a very humble background, right? Now, if you take me from that same background I came from, and you gave me the same money that you gave those people in Saudi Arabia in 1 generation, do you really think I would be inna ma'akum, innama nahnu muslimun? I'd be like, I'm thinking I'm doing a good job too, right? I mean, we assume that if we are given the same challenges of other people, we will find a way to magically somehow not be seduced in the same way. And it's very reductionist. Oh, they're just evil people. Like, no, they fell prey to one of the traps. The first thing would be, a'udhu billah, right? A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Oh Allah, I seek protection in you from this thing, because I can personally see how you give people that don't have money. They didn't, 100 years ago, those people are running around almost shirtless in the middle of the desert. And in 1 generation, you gave them money that people can't even dream about. That is a major fitna, that is a major ibtila, that's a major test. And I'm not trying to exonerate, what they're doing whatsoever. I'm just saying for us to not be overly concerned about the hypocrisy of others and worry about ourselves. One of those signs is what? Mockery, right? So instead of mocking the Saudis, right, it is, seeking Allah's protection from the same kind of thing, asking Allah to guide them, to rectify their hearts. This is hard to do, right? Because we get angry at what we see, what a Muslim should be doing. But if you start going down this path of excessive mockery, that is one of the qualities that Allah Ta'ala ascribes to the hypocrite, right? And then from that, you will think that what you're doing is a good thing, right? A Muslim should not curse another Muslim, right? This is right. But simply because they're doing something you don't like. I understand where your heart is coming from, right? But this is where he says what? حَتَّى ظَنُّوا أَنَّهُمْ مَعَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Like you will do this to such an extent that you think you're acting just like a believer, but what you're doing is wrong. And then I think I related maybe a month or 2 ago, there's the passage I think towards the end of the 6th chapter of the Qur'an, in which one day the Prophet ﷺ came to Fajr Salah, and often for the Fajr Salah he would make the dua of Qunut, right, the special prayer after the 2nd rak'ah. And normally it would be the dua of Qunut and this beautiful dua and whatnot. But this time around he was like, Allahumma il'an, fulan and fulan. Oh Allah, curse this and that person, right? And the ayah came down in Revelation to him, Laysa laka min al-amri shay'an. Right? You don't have anything to do with the affair of deciding who is going to be punished and who's going to be rewarded. Right? That Allah Ta'ala even had to remind the Prophet, even though, I can understand why the Prophet ﷺ wanted to curse certain people, because, he was killing some Muslims, they were, oppressing them, doing these things, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, who has a clean heart, and his intentions were in the right place. But Allah just had to tell him, look, as to who is rewarded and punished, this is my decision alone, right? And ironically, one of the people in the group that he wanted to punish was a man whose name was Suhail ibn Amr. Suhail becomes a very, very important Muslim, particularly actually after the death of the Prophet, right? So Suhail he was fighting against the Muslims mainly because his sons disobeyed him and became Muslim, right? So he was like, look, I'm not feeling any guy that's being able to, make my sons disobey me, right? It was like kind of a macho thing a little bit, like a muru'ah kind of thing, right? But eventually Suhail becomes Muslim and is actually one of the people that works very actively to keep Islam very much alive in that area in the Hijaz after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So even though the Prophet's feelings were in the right place, right, he was cursing somebody that ultimately Allah had a plan to what? Become Muslim, right? So again, just be mindful of your emotions, right? I mean, yes, if you see something wrong, have a feeling about it, right? Or as the Prophet ﷺ said, what? You know, either change it with your hand, you know, your tongue, or your heart, right? None of those says what? Just become kind of cynical, become mocking, become mean-spirited. This is not the way of Muhammad ﷺ, right? So this is just, you know, this passage, we'll pick up on this because now from this, we'll start to transition into another topic, inshallah, that we'll pick up not this week, or not next week, but the week after, inshallah. Any questions before we break for the evening, by Isha? Straightforward, inshallah. So, you know, we ask Allah to guide us, to purify our hearts, and to, you know, to really, we ask Allah for protection from, you know, min shururi anfusina, right? Wa sayyiati a'malina. When you hear the Imam make this dua at the beginning of the khutbah, this is from the dua that the Prophet ﷺ would make when giving a khutbah, and he would ask Allah asking protection from the evil whisperings of our own soul, right? وَمِن سَيِّئَاتِ أَعْمَالِنَا, and from the evil of our deeds. And that is definitely, you know, one of the most evil of things is to have your morality and your perspective flipped, where something that is evil and bad you now perceive to be good, and something good you perceive to be evil. So from this we ask Allah Ta'ala protection and success. You want to make the Azan, or you want me to do?
Yeah.
Is it in or is it too early?
About 6 more minutes or so.
Oh, okay.